What does a woman do when she has it all? The billionaire husband, the Manhattan penthouse, a baby on the way, and the devastating knowledge that it's all a lie. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about a woman who refused to be a victim. A woman who, when faced with the ultimate betrayal, didn't just get mad. She got strategic. She dried her tears, smiled at her cheating husband, and began building a war machine behind the facade of forgiveness. This is the story of how a pregnant wife orchestrated the most calculated public and catastrophic takedown in high society history. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was always precisely 2 degrees a climate-controlled perfection that mirrored the life Isabella Rossi Sterling had so meticulously built. From the outside, her world was flawless. The wife of Alistair Sterling, the charismatic wunderkind behind the tech behemoth Sterling Innovations, Isabella was a modern-day queen. Her life was a curated collection of envy-inducing moments, front row at Paris Fashion Week philanthropic galas, where she and Alistair were the luminous power couple, and romantic getaways to private islands that graced the covers of society magazines. At 32, she was elegant, with the sharp intellect of her economics degree from Wharton and the gentle grace inherited from her Italian mother. She wasn't just a trophy wife. She had been Alistair's first investor, using a modest inheritance to fund the prototype of the algorithm that launched his empire. They were a team, a brand, the living embodiment of the new American dream. And now, 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son, Isabella felt the final perfect piece of their masterpiece clicking into place. The first crack in the facade appeared on a Tuesday. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable. Alistair, a man who lived and breathed his schedule, came home late. Not unusual for a CEO, but he smelled faintly of something other than his signature Tom Ford cologne, a floral musky scent, jasmine and sandalwood. Unfamiliar. "Long day, my love?" Isabella asked, rising to greet him. Her own custom-made maternity gown, a soft, periwinkle silk, flowed around her. "Brutal," he sighed, kissing her forehead, but avoiding her lips. His eyes were distant. "The Aura launch is a monster. We're chasing down a phantom bug in the predictive analytics module." Aura was his magnum opus, a revolutionary AI-driven lifestyle platform that promised to curate every aspect of a user's life, from their investments to their vacation plans. It was set to be his legacy, the project that would elevate him from a mere millionaire to a legend. Isabella had helped draft the initial business plan. She understood its intricacies. "Anything I can help with," she offered her hand, resting protectively on her swollen belly. "I can look at the data streams from the beta testers." No, you rest," he said, a little too quickly. "You and little Leo need to take it easy. I've got it handled." He smiled, the brilliant, camera-ready smile that had charmed venture capitalists and journalists alike. But for the first time, it didn't quite reach his eyes. The cracks began to multiply. There were more late nights, hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, and a new password-protected folder on his personal laptop simply labeled contingencies. When she asked, he'd wave it away as boring legal stuff. He became overly solicitous, showering her with gifts, a vintage Cartier necklace, a first-edition copy of her favorite book, gestures that felt less like affection and more like atonement. The confirmation of her fears didn't come from a lipstick-stained collar or a suspicious credit card bill. It was far more modern and far more brutal. One evening, while Alistair was in the shower, his secondary phone, the one he claimed was for international investors, buzzed on the nightstand. Isabella, respecting his privacy, had never touched it. But this time, a name flashed on the screen that made the blood drain from her face. Serafina Vance. Serafina, the impossibly chic, raven-haired head of strategic marketing for their biggest competitor, Nexus Dynamics. Isabella had met her at a few industry events. She remembered Serafina's sharp predatory intelligence and the way her gaze lingered on Alistair a little too long. She had dismissed it as professional rivalry. Now she saw it for what it was. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. It was unlocked. A single, damning message was on the screen. She has no idea, does she? You were incredible last night. That hotel in Soho is our new favorite. Can't wait for Monaco. S. The words blurred. The 72-degree air suddenly felt suffocating Arctic. Every nerve in her body screamed. Soho, Monaco. These were the locations of his recent investor meetings. The jasmine and sandalwood scent, it was Serafina's signature perfume, Black Orchid. The late nights, the secretive calls, the guilt-drenched gifts, it wasn't a phantom bug in the code, it was a virus in their marriage. When Alistair emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a plush towel, he found her standing there. His phone in her hand, her face a mask of shattered porcelain. The color drained from his own face. The master of control, the man who could command a boardroom with a single glance, looked utterly pathetically cornered. Bella, I can explain. The sound that escaped Isabella's lips was not a scream or a sob. It was a low, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Explain, she whispered the word cracking. Explain the hotel in Soho. Explain Monaco. Explain her Alistair. He stammered, launching into a cascade of the classic cowardly excuses. It meant nothing. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness under the pressure of the aura launch. Serafina was aggressive. She came onto him. It was a one-time thing, a lie. She immediately saw through, thanks to the words, last night, and new favorite. A mistake. Isabella's voice gained a dangerous edge of steel. For how long, Alistair? How long has this mistake been going on? He couldn't meet her eyes. A few months. A few months, while she was joyfully picking out colors for the nursery, while she was enduring morning sickness and dreaming of their future, while he was holding her hand during the ultrasound, his eyes fixed on the tiny, fluttering heartbeat of their son on the screen. He was already betraying them both. The betrayal was a physical blow. Her knees felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the mahogany dresser for support. In that moment, she saw her entire world for what it was, a beautifully constructed lie. The penthouse wasn't a home. It was a stage. Their marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a performance. And she had been the unknowing leading lady in a farce. Her first instinct was primal. Flee. Pack a bag, call her lawyers, expose him for the fraud he was, and retreat to her family's villa in Tuscany to lick her wounds and raise her son alone. She could see the headlines, feel the pitying stares of their so-called friends. Poor Isabella, humiliated, abandoned while pregnant. The thought of it was another kind of violation. She looked at Alistair, at his pathetic, pleading face, and then she looked down at her own hands resting on the swell of her stomach. Little Leo, her son. This wasn't just about her heart anymore. It was about his future, his legacy, his birthright. Alistair hadn't just cheated on his wife, he had gambled with his son's security. And in that moment of supreme agony, a new, cold clarity washed over Isabella. The grief, the shock, the searing pain, they didn't vanish. They crystallized. They hardened into something else. Something cold, sharp, and purposeful. He was expecting tears. He was expecting screams. He was expecting a dramatic exit. He was prepared for a messy, emotional divorce, where his army of lawyers would paint her as hysterical and unstable, minimizing her settlement and protecting his precious company. He was not prepared for what she did next. She took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped a single tear from her cheek, and looked him directly in the eye. Her expression was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow, a performance worthy of an Oscar. "I see," she said, her voice trembling but steady. For the sake of this baby, Alistair, for the sake of our family, we have to find a way to fix this." Alistair Sr. stared at her stunned. Relief washed over his features so potent it was nauseating. He had expected a hurricane and was being offered a harbor. "Bella, you mean it," he stammered, taking a step towards her. You'll forgive me." "Forgiveness is a long road," she said, her voice a masterpiece of controlled anguish. "But our son deserves a father. He deserves a family. We will go to therapy. You will cut off all contact with that woman immediately and forever. You will give me complete, unfettered access to all your calendars, your communications, everything. No more secrets. You will earn back my trust, Alistair. You will earn back our family." He nodded eagerly, grabbing her hands. "Anything, Bella, anything. It's over with her, I swear. Thank you. God, thank you." He pulled her into an embrace, burying his face in her hair. She stood rigid in his arms, her eyes wide open, staring at the glittering skyline of the city that had once felt like her kingdom. He thought he was holding his forgiving wife. He was wrong. He was holding his executioner. As he held her whispering promises, he had no intention of keeping Isabella made a vow of her own. She would not be the sad, pitied wife. She would not be a footnote in his biography. She would play the part of the forgiving, graceful Madonna, the loyal wife, standing by her man. She would smile at the cameras, host his dinner parties, and sleep in his bed. And all the while, she would be gathering her weapons. She would use her knowledge of his empire, his vanities, his weaknesses. She would become a ghost in his machine, a quiet, smiling assassin. He thought he had dodged a bullet. He had no idea he had just welcomed a Trojan horse into the heart of his city. The public destruction of Alistair Sterling and Serafina Vance had just begun, and Isabella would be the one to light the match. The days that followed were a surreal performance of domestic tranquility. Isabella moved through her gilded cage with a newfound chilling purpose. On the surface, she was the picture of wounded but willing reconciliation. She found the best marriage counselor in Manhattan, Dr. Juliana Reed, a woman known for her discretion and her work with high-profile couples. Isabella sat through their sessions, crying at the appropriate moments, speaking of her pain and her hope for their future. She watched Alistair spin his narrative of regret, of pressure, of a momentary lapse in judgment that he swore would never happen again. He was a convincing liar, but Isabella was now a discerning audience. Her compliance was Alistair's tranquilizer. He believed her performance because his ego demanded it. The idea that she would leave him, that she could dismantle the perfect image they had built, was more threatening than any affair. Her willingness to fix things affirmed his own self-importance. He became complacent, believing the crisis was averted. It was the gravest miscalculation of his life. While Alistair saw a healing wife, Isabella was mobilizing a silent army. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer, but to a name she had kept from her days at Wharton, a man who had been at the top of their class, a quiet genius who eschewed the glamour of Wall Street for the shadows of forensic accounting. His name was Marcus Thorne. They met not in a sterile office, but on a bench in the conservatory garden of Central Park, a place of serene beauty that provided a stark contrast to the ugliness of their task. Bella, Marcus said, his eyes kind but serious. "It's been a long time. You look well radiant despite the circumstances." Isabella managed a small, tired smile. The glow of impending motherhood, or perhaps just the cold fire of vengeance. It's hard to tell these days. She handed him a sleek encrypted hard drive. "Alistair thinks I'm at a prenatal yoga class." "What's on this?" "Everything I could access. My initial investment documents, the company's early incorporation papers. I co-signed org charts, shareholder reports from the first 5 years. What I need, Marcus, is the truth." He's been bragging about the company's valuation in anticipation of the Aura IPO, but he's also become incredibly secretive about the financials. I helped him structure the initial holding companies. I know he values complexity and opaqueness. Find out what he's hiding. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze sharp. "He thinks you're just the beautiful face of the brand. He's forgotten you have the brain that helped build it." "Exactly," Isabella said, her voice firm. "He's forgotten who he's dealing with." Her second call was to a man known only as Mr. Jones, a private investigator whose reputation was whispered in the most elite and paranoid circles of New York. He was impossibly expensive and surgically discreet. They met in the hushed, anonymous lobby of the Baccarat Hotel. Mr. Jones was an unassuming man in a tailored but forgettable grey suit. He looked more like a mid-level accountant than a purveyor of secrets. "Mrs. Sterling," he greeted her, his voice a low monotone. "He thinks it's over," Isabella stated. No preamble needed. "He thinks he can manage this. He will see her again. His hubris won't allow him to stop. He'll just get better at hiding it. I need you to be better at finding it." She slid a folder across the polished table. It contained photos of Alistair and Serafina, their schedules, known associates, and favorite restaurants. "I need irrefutable proof. High-definition photos. Video if possible. I don't want grainy shots from a car. I want evidence so clear, so undeniable, that it can be projected onto a 50-foot screen and lose none of its damning clarity. The Monaco trip for the FinTech Forum is in 3 weeks. He's already told me I shouldn't fly that late in my pregnancy. I have a feeling she'll be there. This level of surveillance is intrusive and carries risk," Mr. Jones said, his face impassive. "The risk is mine," Isabella replied, her dark eyes flashing. "The cost is irrelevant. Just bring me the ammunition." With her pieces in motion, Isabella turned her attention to the battlefield itself, her own home and her husband's company. She played the role of the devoted wife to perfection. She began showing an interest in the Aura launch again, framing it as her desire to reconnect with Alistair's world, to be the partner she once was. "I feel so disconnected from everything cooped up in here," she told him one evening, her voice laced with manufactured vulnerability. "I want to feel involved again. I want to be proud of what we're building. Let me help. Let me see the progress." Blinded by her seeming capitulation, Alistair welcomed her back into the fold. He gave her an access card and a login to the internal servers, seeing it as a sign of their healing. For him, it was a gesture of transparency. For Isabella, it was the key to the armory. She spent her days at the Sterling Innovations headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel. She was a benevolent pregnant ghost, drifting through the building with a serene smile. She brought artisanal donuts for the coding teams, remembered the names of the interns' dogs, and sat in on marketing meetings offering gentle, insightful suggestions that reminded everyone why she had been so integral in the early days. But when the offices emptied out at night, Isabella's real work began. She didn't look for love letters or incriminating emails. She was hunting bigger game. She delved deep into the server, navigating the complex architecture she had helped design years ago. She was looking for the company's weak points, the structural flaws in Alistair's empire. Her breakthrough came not from the financials, but from the technical files for Aura itself. Buried deep within the code were modules that seemed unusually polished, almost too perfect for a project still in development. They didn't have the messy digital fingerprints of Alistair's in-house team. The coding language was subtly different, the annotation style unique. Cross-referencing the file creation dates with Alistair's calendar, she found a correlation. The modules had been uploaded shortly after a series of meetings with a small, brilliant Israeli startup called Loom AI. Alistair had been in talks to acquire them for their groundbreaking predictive personalization engine. The deal had publicly fallen through 6 months ago, with Alistair claiming their tech wasn't scalable. But here it was. The core of Loom AI's proprietary technology woven directly into the fabric of Aura. He hadn't acquired them. He had strip-mined their code during the due diligence phase and passed it off as his own. It was intellectual property theft on a grand scale, a corporate crime that would not only destroy Aura, but could potentially land him in prison. She downloaded everything, the original Loom AI pitch deck, the technical data they had shared under NDA, and the corresponding code within Aura, and sent it all to a new, encrypted drive. A week later, Marcus Thorne called. "You were right," he said, his voice grim. "It's a shell game." He set up a network of offshore LLCs in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein. He's been systematically undervaluing company assets on the domestic books and parking the real value offshore. He's not just preparing for an IPO, Bella. He's been building a fortress to protect his wealth, likely in anticipation of a divorce. He's been planning to cheat you out of your half for years. The news was a cold stone in her stomach. This wasn't just a recent betrayal fueled by passion. It was a long, calculated campaign of deceit. He had been plotting to diminish her share of the empire she helped create long before Serafina ever entered the picture. The affair was just a symptom of a much deeper rottenness. Isabella felt a flicker of the old pain, but it was quickly extinguished by the icy resolve that now fueled her. "Send me everything, Marcus. Every account number, every transaction record. Create a visual chart that a child could understand. I want to show the world exactly how the money flows." The final piece arrived 2 weeks later, on the day Alistair was due back from Monaco. It was a simple manila envelope delivered by messenger with no return address. Inside was a single high-capacity memory card. That night, Isabella locked herself in her study, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. She inserted the card into her laptop, the screen filled with images and videos from Mr. Jones. The quality was breathtaking, cinematic. There was Alistair and Serafina laughing on the terrace of the Hotel de Paris Monte Carlo, the Mediterranean sparkling behind them. There they were, kissing passionately on a private yacht, his hand possessively on her waist. There was Serafina, wearing a stunning diamond bracelet, one that Isabella recognized from a jewelry auction catalogue Alistair had been looking at weeks ago, claiming he was searching for a push present for her. The images were a visceral gut punch, but she didn't cry. She catalogued them. She sorted them. She saw them not as artifacts of her pain, but as weapons. She now possessed the 3 pillars of Alistair's ruin. 1. the moral betrayal, undeniable high-definition proof of his deep and continuing affair, shattering his public image as a devoted family man. 2. The financial fraud. A clear, traceable map of his offshore schemes proving his intent to defraud not only his wife, but also his investors and the IRS. 3. The corporate crime. The smoking gun of the Loom AI intellectual property theft, a time bomb that would obliterate his magnum opus aura. She had the sword, the shield, and the poison. Her gaze fell upon the invitation resting on her desk. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed in gold foil. Sterling Innovations cordially invites you to the global launch of Aura. The gala was in 1 week. It was to be the crowning achievement of Alistair's career, held at the iconic Temple of Dendur in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. An evening of triumph, of legacy, of unassailable success. Isabella picked up the invitation, her fingers tracing the elegant script. Alistair had chosen the venue. He would stand before the titans of industry, the media, and the world, in front of an ancient temple, and declare himself a god of the new digital age. A slow, cold smile spread across Isabella's face. It was the perfect stage, not for his coronation, but for his execution. And she, his loving, supportive pregnant wife, would be standing right by his side when the guillotine fell. In the final week leading up to the Aura Gala, Isabella was a phantom of serene efficiency. She was the perfect host in waiting, orchestrating the final details of the event with a placid smile that concealed the maelstrom beneath. She approved the catering menu from Nobu, consulted with the florists on the thousands of white orchids that would adorn the Temple of Dendur, and even helped Alistair fine-tune his keynote address. "You need to be more personal here," she'd advise, pointing to a paragraph in his speech. "Don't just talk about data points. Talk about dreams. Talk about family. It will resonate more." Alistair, basking in the glow of her renewed partnership, soaked it in. "You're brilliant, Bella. I knew we could get through it. We're stronger than ever." He would kiss her, then, a proprietary kiss that no longer made her skin crawl, for it felt no more real than the press of cold metal. She was an actor in the final act of her own play, and her detachment was her armor. Behind this facade of domestic bliss, Isabella was meticulously assembling her war machine. She worked with the quiet precision of a bomb maker, ensuring every wire was connected, every timer set. Her first move was strategic and surgical. Using an anonymous email address and a VPN that routed through 3 different countries, she sent a package of information to 2 specific people. The first recipient was Avi, the fiery, outspoken CEO of Loom AI in Tel Aviv. The package contained the side-by-side code comparison, the timestamps of the illicit downloads from Sterling Innovations servers, and the original non-disclosure agreement Alistair had signed. The subject line of the email was simple: "He thought you'd never find out." The second recipient was Diana Vreeland, not the famous fashion editor of a bygone era, but her namesake granddaughter, a ruthless Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the New York Times, known for dismantling corporate titans. Diana's package was more comprehensive. It included the Loom AI evidence, a simplified version of Marcus Thorne's financial diagrams showing the offshore shell companies, and a single tantalizing photograph from Mr. Jones's collection, Alistair and Serafina on the yacht in Monaco, a picture of blissful, adulterous decadence. The email to Diana was carefully worded: "Mr. Sterling is about to launch a product built on lies. The enclosed is just the beginning. The full story will break at his launch gala in 5 days at approximately 9:15 p.m. EST. You'll want to have your finger on the publish button. A source will be in touch. She gave them the scent of blood, but not the whole story. She needed them primed and ready, their own journalistic and legal instincts driving them to verify her claims independently. She knew they would. A story this big was a career maker. Next, she addressed the social aspect. The world of New York high society was a fickle ecosystem, built on whispers and alliances. Isabella needed to isolate Alastair and Serafina before the bomb dropped. She began her quiet campaign at a charity luncheon for the New York Public Library, an event crawling with the city's most influential women. Cornered by a group of them, including the notoriously gossipy socialite Blythe Worthington, Isabella put on a masterful performance. She looked radiant but fragile, a combination they found irresistible. "Isabella, darling, you're simply glowing," Blythe gushed. "Alastair must be taking such good care of you." Isabella summoned a watery, brave smile. "He's trying," she said, her voice soft, but carrying just enough weight to make them all lean in closer. "The launch has been so stressful for him. He's been under immense pressure. Sometimes it makes men do foolish things." She let the comment hang in the air, a perfectly ambiguous statement that could mean anything and everything. She then turned the conversation with practiced ease to Serafina Vance. "I saw Serafina from Nexus Dynamics at a restaurant the other day," she said casually, as if just remembering. "She has such ambition. You can see it in her eyes. It's a kind of hunger that's almost frightening. Some women will just do anything to get ahead." She didn't accuse. She didn't have to. She planted a seed. In a world where reputation was currency, she had just painted Serafina as a desperate predator and Alastair as a straying fool, all while maintaining her own image as a graceful, long-suffering wife. The whispers would do the rest of the work for her. By the time the gala arrived, the social court would already be half convinced of their guilt. Her final and most crucial preparation was the weapon itself. She took the vast collection of evidence, the photos, the videos, Marcus Thorne's financial charts, the Loom AI code comparison, and handed it over to a video editor who was a trusted cousin of her personal assistant, a young artist who owed Isabella a favor. "I need a short film," Isabella instructed, meeting him in his cramped, dimly lit studio in Bushwick, a world away from her Park Avenue penthouse. "It needs to be a masterpiece of narrative destruction. Start with us, Alastair and I, in the early days. The happy photos, the wedding, the company launch. Build the myth, then shatter it." She laid out the sequence. The romantic music would come to a scratching halt. The first image of Serafina would appear. Then the cascade, the Monaco photos, the yacht video, the diamond bracelet on Serafina's wrist, juxtaposed with a clip of Alastair talking to an interviewer about his devotion to his wife. Then Marcus's simple, damning charts of the offshore accounts, with arrows showing money being funneled away from the company's public books. The finale would be the side-by-side code with a quote from Loom AI's own marketing material describing their proprietary engine, followed by Alastair in a different interview boasting about his in-house team's revolutionary breakthrough. The final 5 seconds, Isabella said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, should be just a black screen. And on it, in simple white text, the words, "Congratulations on the launch, Lester." The editor, a young man with piercings and a cynical view of the world, looked from the evidence to Isabella's calm, determined face. "This is biblical," he breathed. "He won't just be ruined. He'll be a meme." "That's the point," Isabella said. She also prepared a personal package for the gala. Inside a discreet leather portfolio, she placed a hard copy of the divorce petition her lawyer had drafted, citing adultery and financial fraud. Beside it was a formal notice of her lawsuit against Sterling Innovations for her rightful share of the company valued before the fraudulent devaluing. And on top of that, a printed copy of the evidence she had sent to Avi and Diana Vreeland. On the day of the gala, a strange calm settled over Isabella. She spent the afternoon at a prenatal spa, having a massage, getting her hair and makeup done. She was an actor, preparing for her opening night. When she returned to the penthouse, Alistair was already in his tuxedo, pacing nervously. "There you are," he said, a relieved smile on his face. "You look breathtaking, Bella. Truly." She was wearing a custom-designed gown by Valentino, a column of deep crimson that flowed over her pregnant form. It was a statement, not the soft, forgiving pastels she usually wore, but the color of power, of blood, of war. On her ears, she wore simple diamond studs, and on her wrist, nothing. A deliberate vacancy, where a gift from him should have been. "Are you ready for your big night?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm nervous as hell. Everything is riding on this." He straightened his bow tie. "But having you by my side, it makes all the difference. I know we're going to be okay." "Yes," Isabella said, looking at his reflection in the mirror. "Everything is going to change tonight." As they rode the elevator down, Alistair reached out and took her hand. "After tonight," he said, "all this aura madness is over. It's just you, me and Leo. I promise." Isabella looked at their joined hands. She gave his a gentle squeeze, a final perfect touch of counterfeit affection. In the car on the way to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, she sent a single pre-written text message to a number she had been given. The recipient was the head of the audiovisual team for the gala, a freelancer Alistair had used for years, but a man whose daughter's college tuition had been secretly paid for by a charitable donation from an anonymous benefactor a week prior. "Isabella." The message was one word: tonight. A reply came back instantly. "The alternate feed is ready and waiting for your signal. Good luck." Isabella deleted the exchange and placed her phone in her clutch. She looked out the window as they pulled up to the museum's grand entrance, flashes from the paparazzi cameras already strobing against the glass. The stage was set. The audience was assembled. The actors were in place. Alistair thought he was arriving at his coronation. He had no idea he was walking his wife to the gallows, and she was the one holding the rope. The Temple of Dender, housed within its own grand glass-walled wing of the Met, was a breathtaking sight. The ancient Egyptian temple, a monument to gods and mortals, was bathed in ethereal blue and gold light. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved silently through the throngs of guests, offering champagne and canapes. The air hummed with power, a potent cocktail of old money, new tech, and ravenous media. Isabella was magnificent. She moved through the room on Alistair's arm, a radiant, crimson-clad goddess of impending motherhood. She smiled. She accepted congratulations. She touched her belly when people cooed over the coming baby. Every gesture was a brushstroke on her canvas of deception. She saw Serafina Vance across the room, holding a glass of champagne, looking regal in a silver gown. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Isabella gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture so layered with meaning it could have been acknowledgement, warning, or dismissal. Serafina, confident in her victory, merely smirked and looked away. Alistair was in his element, the magnetic center of his own universe. He shook hands with senators, laughed with venture capitalists, and gave charmingly self-deprecating quotes to journalists. He was a king holding court on the eve of his greatest conquest. At precisely 9:00 p.m., the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight found Alistair as he strode onto the stage erected before the temple. Behind him, a colossal screen, nearly the size of the temple's gateway, glowed with the Aura logo. "Friends, partners, visionaries," he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "We stand tonight in the shadow of history, a temple built to honor ancient gods. But tonight, we are not looking to the past. Tonight, we look to the future, a future we can curate, predict, and perfect." Isabella stood near the front of the stage, positioned in a place of honor, her face a perfect portrait of wifely adoration. She discreetly pulled her phone from her clutch. Alistair's speech was brilliant. He spoke of a world without friction, of lives optimized by Aura. He painted a picture of a seamless existence, all powered by the revolutionary predictive engine his team had built from the ground up. "Our technology doesn't just respond to you," he declared, his voice rising with passion. "It anticipates you. It knows what you need before you do. It is the culmination of years of dedication, of tireless innovation, from the greatest minds in the industry." This was the moment. As he paused for effect, basking in the captivated silence of the audience, Isabella sent her final text message, a single letter, Y. On stage, Alistair clicked his remote, ready to launch the grand demo video. "Let me show you the future. Let me show you Aura." The huge screen behind him flickered, but it wasn't the sleek corporate demo of Aura that appeared. Instead, it was a photograph of a much younger Alistair and Isabella laughing, eating pizza on the floor of their first tiny apartment, the original business plan for Sterling Innovations spread out around them. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Alistair froze, his confident smile faltering. He tapped the remote again. Nothing. Then Isabella's voice, calm and clear, filled the vast hall emanating from the speakers. It was a voiceover from the video. "We started with a dream," she said, as a montage of their wedding photos and early successes played on the screen. "A partnership. A life built on trust." Alistair's face went pale. He stared wildly at the tech booth at the back of the room, but the technician was looking down, avoiding his gaze. The romantic music on the video screeched to a halt, replaced by a deafening silence. And then the first image of Monaco appeared. Alistair and Serafina, laughing on the hotel terrace, projected 20 feet high for the entire world to see. The gasp from the audience was a collective physical force. People instinctively reached for their phones. Serafina Vance, in the front row, looked as if she had been turned to stone, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. But somewhere along the way, Isabella's voiceover continued cold and precise. The dream became a lie. The cascade began. The photo of them kissing on the yacht. A close-up of the diamond bracelet on Serafina's wrist. Then it cut to Marcus Thorne's financial charts. Simple, brutal arrows showed millions of dollars being funneled from Sterling Innovations into anonymous offshore accounts in Liechtenstein. The numbers and dates clear as day. The murmur in the crowd turned into a roar of shock and outrage. Finally, the screen split. On one side, the intricate proprietary code from Loom AI. On the other, the identical code from Aura's core programming. A quote from Loom AI's CEO Avi Cohen appeared on the screen. Our technology is our soul. It is not for sale, and it is not for theft. At that exact moment, every phone in the room buzzed in near unison. Diana Vreeland had just published her article. The headline was devastating. Aura of a fraud, Alistair Sterling's empire built on stolen tech, offshore accounts, and a web of deceit. The article contained links to the documents, the photos, everything. The video on the screen reached its crescendo. It cut to black. And then the simple white words appeared hanging in the air like a death sentence. Congratulations on the launch, Alistair. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. Alistair stood on the stage, paralyzed, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. He looked like a man who had been publicly disemboweled. And then Isabella moved. She walked calmly up the stairs and onto the stage. She took the microphone from his limp, nerveless hand. She turned to face the stunned crowd, her crimson gown a beacon in the spotlight. She was no longer the supportive wife. She was the arbiter of justice. "My name is Isabella Rossi Sterling," she said, her voice steady and powerful, carrying to every corner of the hall. "For the last 6 months, I have lived a lie. But tonight, that ends." She looked directly at Alistair, whose face was ashen. "This man, my husband, did not just betray our marriage vows." She then turned her gaze to the audience. "He betrayed his partners. He betrayed his shareholders. He built his legacy on theft and fraud. He is a moral and financial bankrupt." She held up the leather portfolio. "In my hand, I hold a divorce petition that will be filed at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I also hold a lawsuit for my 50% share of the legitimate assets of the company I helped to build. All of the evidence you have just seen has been provided to the SEC, the IRS, and the legal team at Loom AII. She took a step closer to the edge of the stage, her hand resting on her stomach. "I was told I should be silent for the sake of my child, but I decided my son will not be born into a legacy of lies. He will be born into a legacy of truth and of a mother who refused to be a victim." She let that statement hang in the air for a moment, then gave a final regal nod. "Thank you for coming." With that, she turned and walked off the stage, not looking back. She didn't need to. She could hear the chaos erupting behind her. The frantic shouting of journalists, the panicked cries of investors, the cacophony of a king being torn from his throne in the middle of his own court. She walked through the stunned, parting crowd like Moses through the Red Sea. Her car was waiting, the door held open by a driver who had been instructed to keep the engine running. As she slid into the back seat, she caught one last glimpse of the scene. Alistair was on his knees on the stage, his head in his hands. Serafina was being swarmed by photographers, her face a rictus of terror as she tried to flee. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the pandemonium of the Met behind. Isabella leaned her head back against the cool leather. She took a deep breath, the first truly clean breath she had taken in months. It wasn't a breath of joy or even of triumph. It was a breath of release. The war was over. The Titan had fallen. And from the ashes, she would begin to build a new world, a real one, for herself and for her son. The fallout from the Gala of Ruin, as the tabloids quickly dubbed it, was not merely swift. It was a societal earthquake. By sunrise, every major news network was leading with Alistair Sterling's spectacular implosion. Financial news tickers scrolled with Sterling Innovations' stock symbol frozen next to a catastrophic downward arrow, a digital tombstone for his empire. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, convened a pre-dawn emergency meeting and unanimously voted to sever all ties with their founder. Their public statement was a masterclass in corporate distancing, speaking of their shock and dismay, and pledging full cooperation with the inevitable onslaught of authorities. That onslaught was biblical. The SEC, armed with Isabella's immaculate evidence, filed charges for securities fraud before the morning's first coffee had been brewed. The Department of Justice, seeing a high-profile case of corporate malfeasance gift-wrapped for them, began assembling a task force to prosecute for wire fraud and intellectual property theft. The IRS, guided by Marcus Thorne's meticulously detailed charts, moved with terrifying speed, placing a lien on every known domestic asset, effectively freezing Alistair's access to the very fortune he had schemed to protect. To cap it all, Avilaoconnor and Loom AI filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit so ironclad it was seen by legal analysts less as litigation and more as a formal surrender negotiation. Alistair became a ghost, haunting his own ruined life. The senators and titans of industry who had clapped him on the back 24 hours earlier now had secretaries instructed to deny his existence. His memberships to the city's most exclusive country clubs and social circles were revoked via terse single-sentence emails. He was a prisoner in his own penthouse, with the baying hounds of the paparazzi camped out below. The few photos that emerged showed a man utterly ravaged by his own hubris, his handsome face a permanent mask of haggard disbelief. Serafina Vance's fall was just as brutal and far less dignified. Fired from Nexus Dynamics for gross misconduct and bringing disrepute to their brand, she became a city-wide cautionary tale. The video of her kissing Alistair on the yacht became a viral meme, remixed and satirized into oblivion. Branded a homewrecker and a failed usurper, she found herself unemployable and socially radioactive. In a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, she gave a disastrous interview claiming she was a victim manipulated by Alistair's power. But he, in his own spiraling rage, fired back through a lawyer calling her a willing and eager co-conspirator in his personal downfall. Their toxic affair curdled into a bitter public war of recriminations, leaving them both utterly isolated in the wreckage. Isabella, in stark contrast, executed a flawless retreat. She vanished from the Park Avenue penthouse, moving into a quiet, heavily secured brownstone in a leafy Brooklyn neighborhood, a world away from the blaze of her old life. She communicated only through her formidable legal team, and a crisis publicist she hired to sculpt the narrative. Her only official statement was a model of dignified strength. "My only focus now is on the health and safety of my unborn child. The legal process will run its course." Her silence was a strategic masterstroke. It allowed the world to project its own narrative onto her, and that narrative was one of a modern-day Boudica. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was a symbol of righteous fury and strategic genius. Feminist blogs hailed her. Support groups for wronged spouses idolized her. Business schools at Harvard and Wharton began preparing case studies on the Aura Gala, analyzing it as the ultimate example of corporate hubris meeting its match. 3 months later, far from the flash of cameras, Isabella gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Leonardo Rossi, not Sterling. She gave him her own name, a name untainted by scandal, a name that signified a new beginning. The legal battles raged for over a year, but it was a war of attrition Alistair was destined to lose. Isabella's legal team, armed with her perfect arsenal of evidence, was devastatingly effective. During depositions, They methodically dismantled Alistair's attempts to lie and deflect his composure, crumbling under the weight of his own signed documents and time-stamped betrayals. The courts, swayed by the sheer malice and premeditation of his financial deception, made an example of him. Her divorce settlement was astronomical, awarding her not just 50% of the legitimate assets, but a punitive sum in damages that left him financially crippled. Stripped of his fortune, his reputation, and facing years of litigation and the very real threat of jail time, Alistair Sterling was a broken man. The Titan was a shell, a hollowed-out cautionary tale, whispered about at the galas he could no longer attend. With her settlement, Isabella didn't retreat to a life of quiet luxury. She repurposed her anger and her wealth. She established the Rossi Foundation, a venture capital firm, with a revolutionary mission to exclusively fund and mentor tech startups founded and led by women. She sought out the brilliant, overlooked innovators, the ones building companies based on the very principles of ethics and transparency Alistair had so thoroughly mocked. Her new office was not a monument of glass and steel, but a collaborative workspace in Soho filled with light-buzzing energy and the palpable excitement of creation. She became a legend in her own right, not as Alistair Sterling's tragic wife, but as Isabella Rossi, the revered investor who had turned the ashes of one corrupt empire into the foundation for a dozen new ethical ones. One crisp autumn afternoon, sitting in her office and bouncing a giggling one-year-old Leo on her knee, she looked out the window at the bustling city. Her life was no longer about perfect 72-degree air and curated public appearances. It was about messy board meetings, challenging mentorship sessions, and the glorious chaotic reality of motherhood. It was demanding, exhausting, and authentically her own. She had faced the ultimate betrayal, not with the quiet grace of forgiveness, but with the roaring fire of justice. And in doing so, she hadn't just destroyed a man. She had built a better, truer world for her son and for herself. She had found her own truth, and it was more valuable than any fortune. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can forge the greatest strengths. She transformed her pain into a plan, her grief into a strategy, and her humiliation into a historic victory. She didn't just walk away from a toxic marriage, she held a bonfire and ensured the whole world saw the truth burn brightly. Her journey shows us that sometimes true empowerment isn't about forgiving and forgetting, but about seeking justice and building a new legacy from the ground up on your own terms. If you were moved by Isabella's incredible story of resilience and perfectly executed justice, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with anyone who appreciates a story of a true titan rising from the ashes. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more incredible stories of drama, revenge, and ultimate triumph. What part of Isabella's plan did you find the most brilliant? Let us know in the comments below.